You've seen the epic safaris, the breathtaking silhouetted sunsets, and because you already know a trip to Africa is the kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience that can make every other trip look small in comparison, that it's almost held you off from planning the trip in the first place because for a trip like this, where do you even start? That's where I come in. This video is the perfect place if you've been dreaming of a trip to Africa but really don't know where to start. I'm going to talk you through how to choose the right destination, how to budget for your trip, and we're going to go through the smartest way to plan for your safari or trip to Africa using our 4-step planning method. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to book an unforgettable trip without the stress or confusion and without the fear of missing out that you picked the wrong safari. Because here's the thing, Africa is a huge continent. You can put together the US, Canada, and Mexico all inside Africa and still have room left over. So how do we even know where to begin on the actual continent? Not only that, but flights are expensive and there are really only a few options of ways to get there because there's not very many direct routes. So that's really gonna start to tailor how we're even getting to Africa in the first place. But here's some good news. If you're somebody who likes to see how it all comes together, we filmed our entire 2-week trip to Africa, which I'm calling the Highlights of Africa, on our other channel, Tim and Finn. You can see us visit South Africa on luxury safaris. You can see us visit Victoria Falls and Devil's Pool. We go over to Chobe in Botswana. So there's 4 countries, lots of different types of experiences, and you can go turn that movie on later. Also in good news, this entire video, I am following our 4-step planning method, which is already a 20-something page PDF guide that you can download, follow along electronically, or print it out and start to plan your trip along with this video. So it's very hands-on, and my goal is that you can come back and use this video as a resource to plan your entire trip start to finish. So let's go to Africa. So in my 4-step method, one of the first things that we do is kind of dream about the trip. We have a whole vision board, and I usually like to start just by looking at the map and kind of seeing regions. There's some certain places we can start to rule out when we're looking at Africa, the continent, on the map, because a trip to Egypt or a trip to Morocco is not the reason you're here. So we're kind of diving down into Southern East Africa. But the reason I'm pointing this out in the guide is because I want you here to stop and think. There's a whole list of questions that help you direct your dreaming. We can focus on the questions, we can think about the trip, you'll want to talk to whoever you're traveling with. For example, maybe there is some safari animal that one of you is really excited to see, like, for me, it's giraffes. For some of the people I was traveling with, it was elephants and lions. So there are certain animals that are more prolific in certain regions of the country. So that might be something that's tailoring your trip. There also, because this is such a hard place to get to from North America, is that flights are really going to start to tailor what makes sense for you so that you don't have an additional 17 hours of travel on each side, especially if you're limited by how many days you can actually travel for. So follow along in the guide so that you know what types of questions to ask yourself at this point while I walk you through some different regions of Africa. In this kind of Africa 101 guide, we're gonna talk about 3 different regions. And I'm gonna focus on South Africa, in the northeast around the Johannesburg, using Johannesburg as an airport as one example. The Serengeti, which of course you've heard of, in the Tanzania and Kenya area. And then also talk about Victoria Falls, which is hard to not mention as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, on the border between Zimbabwe and Zambia, right here around Livingstone. There certainly are other very popular regions of Africa to travel to as well that I would maybe call Africa 201, like level 2 travel. For example, in Botswana, we'll talk about that actually a little bit later in the video, or Uganda up to visit the gorillas. There's definitely more places that you can visit. But for the sake of this video, I'm gonna focus on these 3 because these are probably the most popular because of course the wildlife is amazing, but it's also very close to massive international airports and it's relatively easy to get to from North America and Europe. Let's start with Kenya and Tanzania. This is the iconic safari, what you picture if you Google image safari of the vast desert landscapes, that one singular tree, the giraffes in the skyline. And with so many airports in this region, I think that that's also what makes this one of the most popular places to visit. The Masai Mara and Serengeti National Park are known for the Great Migration, which happens late summer with all of the wildebeest in the area. There are endless plains, and there are some of the top safari lodges in the entire world in this area. If you are restricted on time of year when you can travel, and you will be traveling between June and October, this is a great region to visit because this is the popular season to visit because of what the wildlife is doing. Planning a trip to Africa is not necessarily one of those trips where you want to opt for a shoulder season or visit in the low season, because the reason why it is low season and the reason why it's shoulder season is because it is harder to view the animals. They might not even be there at all. So of that whole travel hacking, save some money, this is not the trip to do that on, because you need and want to be there when the animals are there. What's the easiest way to get to Kenya and Tanzania from North America? A lot of flights you do have to stop over in Europe, but some you can fly direct. So the stopover in Europe could be beneficial because it's going to get you, like KLM has a flight to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam directly to Kilimanjaro. The Kilimanjaro airport is probably the closest, so that you don't have to fly again unless you're doing like an ultra luxury safari and you're taking one of their private bush planes or something. So that you have the shortest length drive. Kilimanjaro's here, and then we've got the Serengeti National Park over here. Also the Ngoro crater area, which if you're in this region, you'll definitely go check that out because it's stunningly beautiful. The next best choice would be to Nairobi, and I think there are some direct flights to Nairobi from North America because you're more able to book that through United or Delta without having to stop over in Europe. Around Nairobi, you could take advantage of being up here in Kenya to add this on to a trip down to Serengeti National Park, which is on the border. That's where you see that famous giraffe hotel there. So there's some things in this area that are catered to all the tourists coming into the Nairobi area. A little less popular, but your third choice would be a flight into Dar es Salaam. That would be the capital of Tanzania. That might be easier if you're doing some award travel, like you're on Turkish Airlines flying through Istanbul, or I think it might be like Etihad or Emirates has a flight through the Middle East down there as well. From there, you are a very, very short little flight. There might be a ferry over to Zanzibar as well. Zanzibar is not on my list. It would not be the top place that I would recommend like a friend going, or certainly not my parents. It has come up in popularity. I've been seeing a lot of influencers travel there recently, but I think the overarching like Instagram versus reality of it is it's kind of in the not worth it category. But of course, that's an island, tropical beaches. You can add that into your trip there as well. If you're looking for adding in a beach into that area, because you're in such big airports there, like Nairobi or Dar es Salaam, there, in my opinion, are so many better opportunities to go to an African island, like an African nation island, like the Seychelles are out here. Oh, Mauritius. I mean, you're starting to get pretty physically far at that point and be like a round trip situation back. But if you're gonna visit there at some point, you're a lot closer than you are in New York. In step one of the planning phase, in this dream phase, we've kind of checked out this region. Let's go check out region number 2 in South Africa. Johannesburg does have a direct flight on United from Newark. That's the one that we took, talking to all the United flight attendants. That's what everybody was so excited for using their benefits for, because they can, just hop on the plane. But that's one of the most competitive flights in North America to take for free as a flight attendant. So here we are over in Johannesburg, and Kruger National Park is one of the best places in Africa to see the Big Five. The topography here does look a little bit different. It's not those vast plains, it's not those vast landscapes. Something that you cannot do here that is popular to do up in like Serengeti area is the hot air balloon ride and safari. The reason being is the topography around this area is much more dense. There's a lot more like vegetation. So if you were up in a hot air balloon, the animals are under trees and between bushes and you're just not gonna see them. So if that is number one thing on your bucket list, I would recommend up in Tanzania and Kenya. But some of the things that you are getting down here in South Africa is maybe you're using the safari portion of your trip as only part of a bigger trip to Africa. It's super popular to visit Cape Town, which is about a 2.5-hour flight from Johannesburg, down here on the other side of the country. And there are so many beautiful regions of South Africa, like the Garden Route down here on the south coast. You can see the southern tip of Africa. There's a lot going on in South Africa that you could make this into a trip, and safari would just be part of it. The reason why I didn't include Cape Town on our trip is I wanted to do more like a highlights of the continent of Africa, or I guess like the region of Southern Africa. And the time of year that's best to go to Cape Town is a little bit different than the best time of year to be on an African safari around Johannesburg. So those trips don't really line up perfectly in that way. The best time to go on safari around this Kruger area is same thing, like North American fall. Kind of this June through November timeline is in the dry season. It is cooler. It's, their winter and coming into spring. And in that, there's not much vegetation on the leaves. So everything is pretty brown and dead, just like our winter as well. But that means that you can see all the animals. If you're coming at the end of spring and into summer, when everything is lush and flowing, the animals just have an easier time like hiding, or it's hard to see them because they're behind a bunch of leaves. Now, what I'll point out here as you start to explore where you would want to visit is from Johannesburg, you will need another flight, but there are a couple different, there's 3 different main airports in this whole region that make it really easy to get close to where you want to go. And we did a full triangle with 1 flight, a car ride, and another flight. And segue to region 3, one of the things that I got most excited about in planning this trip, because my head first started going to, hey, we're already in South Africa. What if we went to Cape Town? And then feeling like, okay, we didn't need to fly all the way up to Nairobi to then take another short flight into the bush area to do Serengeti. They just felt like 2 different trips. But because I was considering adding in a new region on our trip, I found that there were multiple direct flights from the Kruger area up to Victoria Falls. Finding regional flights within Africa can be pretty challenging. They're very limited. If you're watching this and you're European, it is very different from there's not like Ryanair and a bazillion different options or a hop on the train. If you're coming from North America, it might seem a little bit more familiar. The prices regionally within Africa are similar to what we're used to domestically. This might be another $250 a person one way for a 2-hour flight. In Europe, I know that sounds really expensive, but we're used to that here in the States. Hey, but Canadians, you guys get it, because you guys have to transfer to the US to like fly anywhere in Canada. Keeping things high level, region 3 is Victoria Falls for me, because I think that this is one of the coolest places in the world, and it's just always been on my bucket list, so I'm probably just biased. But what takes you here is the big, vast, beautiful Zambezi River. Not only can you do the falls, but there are a couple river cruises here, and that's gonna give you a little bit different type of safari location than if you're up in Serengeti, dry, vast, open plains to kind of more of this water safari. And then same thing coming from South Africa. Also, within a day's round trip, you can get all the way over to Chobe National Park in Botswana, which is what I was referring to earlier as like a level 2. A lot of people go to Botswana, do an entire river safari as their whole trip. But you can get there from Victoria Falls and just get a little taste of it maybe then for your next trip after that. So this Livingston, Victoria Falls area, I think should be added to your list as a secondary location because it has so much going on all really close together. Step 2 in the 4-step planning method is discover. So we've checked out flights, we kind of know the regions from step 1, but discover might take you in to narrow down the regions because maybe you or whoever you're traveling with has to go to that giraffe hotel, or you're so stoked about the hot air balloon ride that's not really available down in South Africa very easily, so it puts you up into Tanzania or Kenya. If Victoria Falls is high on your list, maybe you want something that has an easy direct flight so that you're not spending multiple days in the middle of your trip just flying around at a bunch of airports. And without becoming more educated in all these regions, you might not even know that something exists, so you might not know that it's on your must-do list. So go in at this point in step 2 and start looking at top things to do around Kruger National Park, or top things to do at Victoria Falls, top things to do around the Serengeti. You'll see the Ngoro crater and other things that you might not have known about before seeing my video. What we also do at this point in step 2 is start to research accommodations, which there's no region on earth that's more important than an African safari in where you're booking your nightly accommodations. This is not just like going out to booking.com and booking a hotel room, because your accommodation is also usually your food and your entire safari experience with your guide, and if you are visiting, going into a national park or staying over on a private game reserve. Which brings me to the most important detail you need to know when booking accommodations for an African safari. The difference between a private game reserve and visiting a hotel in a national park. A private game reserve is going to have more of a luxury price tag. These prices are typically priced as a per person, just like it would at an all-inclusive hotel that maybe you've been to before, because it is all of your food, your drinks, and your game drives, which is what the actual experience of getting in the safari vehicle and driving around is called. It's not really called safari, it's called the game drive. A private game reserve can run about $500 a person a day, anywhere up to like $1,500 a person a day. That's the range that I was seeing when I was booking. I'm sure there's more places that are more, I'm sure there's places that are less, but that's an average range. The most important benefit that you need to know about in staying in a private game reserve is the fact that you have access to that game reserve, that land, at any time of day. And these places typically run where that you are on a game drive up before sunrise when the animals are still active in the wee hours of the morning and through the sunrise, and then also at sunset time, staying out on a game drive even into the dark. You're seeing different animals at that time of day. You're out there among the stars, maybe bonfire, cool situations. And that's typically only possible in and on private land. In the national parks, for security reasons, like people not getting eaten by lions, I think, they typically enforce that you are out of the park before sunset. And having experienced both now, I see the importance of being in a private game reserve because of the nature of how animals go about their daily life. They are most active at sunrise and sunset, because think about it, at 1 p.m. in the middle of the day, the lions are under a tree sleeping somewhere, kind of hidden, and just after sunset, they're probably out hunting. So you're just gonna see a lot more activity likely in a private game reserve than a national park. That's not the rule, but that's gonna be the most important thing to take into consideration when you're looking at the two. So when it comes down to your budget, if getting into a private game reserve is at the highest end of your budget, it would be better to stay in the lowest end private game reserve than a really nice place in the national park, because you're getting so much more out of the land and experience and access to the animals in that way versus a really nice hotel for $300 a person a night that includes a private game reserve. In my opinion, you should splurge to get over here into the private reserve and make up for that budget somewhere else on your trip. There are a few exceptions to that rule. There are some hotels in national parks, like for example, this really cool one, the Train on the Bridge in Kruger National Park, includes your food, includes your drinks, includes your game drives. Because it is inside the park already, these drivers and guides have access to the park after hours. So there are some exceptions, and you'll be able to look kind of through the details of the website to know what situation you're in. Are you in a national park? And you can also just look at the map, but are you in a national park or are you in a private game reserve? The second unique, bizarre thing about accommodations for African safari is how are you getting there? These are in really remote places. There's a reason why the wildlife is abundant, because you're not around cities, towns, and especially airports. If you are doing a DIY trip, you're going to want to find a private game reserve that's near a commercial airport. In the ultra luxury level of private game reserves, which if money is no object, great, I'm sure it's super amazing. They have a lot of private planes that for either additional costs or included if you have like this crazy high price point stay, will fly you in onto their land. So you might fly into Johannesburg and then they pick you up from there in their plane. Or you fly from Johannesburg into a regional airport and then from the regional airport, they pick you up in their plane. I'm not gonna go any more into that because I think if you're at that price point, you're probably not watching a DIY video on how to do it. Although if you are, I'm flattered, hi, but you probably have like a travel agent for some help on this too, which is cool, great, wonderful. If you're more like us and you're DIYing this, you want a couple nights at that luxury safari, it's worth getting in there, it's worth doing the private game reserve, but you're not flying private, you're just booking some $200 commercial flight up to this area. Then where we stayed, I think I totally nailed it. I didn't even realize how close it was. But for example, I loved Kapama Karula, which happened to be literally across the street from this airport. The Hoedspruit Airport, HDS. The gate to the private game reserve was literally across the street from the airport. They even picked us up in the game drive vehicles because there was no driving on any public roads really. There's other private reserves right around there too that are really nice. And then there's a bunch of private reserves that are around Kruger National Park and at the Skukuza Airport, like Sabi Park, Sabi Sands Nature Reserve. Those are gonna be some of the top results in this area that you see when you're just Googling to learn about what's here. And that takes me segue into the third weird thing about booking accommodations for your African safari is, surprisingly, for the first time in travel booking over 10 years of motorcycling through Vietnam, swimming with humpback whales in Moorea, there were a lot of places that weren't available to book online. That will be one of the biggest issues that you run into. So here's my workaround. My speculation of why they weren't able to book online is because so many travel agencies book travel for people to go on African safari. So maybe they don't need to take online bookings. Maybe they don't allow it in some places. You would go to their website, then you would go to booking.com. I like to use Agoda in Asia. Just wherever I was looking, I wasn't seeing some places available to book without going through an agent. Until I found this loophole. I did become a travel agent for about 3 weeks because I was so curious if I was gonna get any benefits or perks in becoming a travel agent. Because I booked so much travel for us, I booked so much travel for friends and family, or just advise them on where to go. In that 3-week process, once I realized it wasn't really worth it, was that a lot of the travel agent portals work through Expedia.com. Now, I don't love booking through Expedia because it's like mega third party. I feel like if I'm having a customer service issue, I'm gonna get stuck in 1-800 lost forever. But Expedia owns hotels.com. So specifically on a lot of these safari private game reserve lodges that did not accept online bookings on their own website or on my preferred booking.com, I was finding it on hotels.com because they were listed there because Expedia owns hotels.com, and I think they were already there just so the travel agents could back end book their clients in the Expedia portal on their side. So for DIYing your accommodations for your Africa safari, I would exclusively use hotels.com, keep it all in there. I had no issues with that. I made my largest transaction ever. We had 5 people for 3 nights at a mega luxury safari lodge, Kapama Karula, at about $1,200 a person a night. I had a $20,000 credit card charge through hotels.com, which for something that big, I would think that you would book it somewhere else, but it was fine, great, wonderful, and it was the best 3 nights of the entire trip. Step 3 in the 4-step planning method is to decide. You are now well educated. You've seen some bucket list ideas. You've seen some really cool accommodation options. And in step 3, decide, you start to put together an entire itinerary. This is when the details really matter, especially on a trip like this if you are bopping around. So you are gonna need to go to Google Flights, and you want to start researching direct flight options if you are traveling via airplane in the middle of this trip. In a lot of cases, it might not be worth it if you have to go from your regional airport back to Johannesburg, up to Nairobi, off to another regional airport just so that you can get over to the Serengeti. That might cost you a night of sleeping at the Johannesburg airport hotel, which is nicer than I thought it was going to be at that IHG Intercontinental there. But if you have 10 days in Africa, don't waste 4 of them flying around. There also might be some limitations where there's direct flights on certain days, or there might be direct flights in certain directions. So you might be able to fly outbound but not return, and you need to keep moving in some type of triangle. So the flights and your bucket list experiences are going to start to outline your entire trip. Do not forget to build in time for rest. I always put this in all of our planning videos because my audience here is mostly American. I don't want to say North American because Canadians, I think that you're a little bit better at this than us, but we have so few vacation days, and in my experience, Americans always over plan and overbook trips, and you're just exhausted. We were so tired on our African safari trip that I normally am sharing up to date on Instagram. We're filming. We weren't doing anything but sleeping when we could, because between the sunset game drive, a 4-course dinner, and then a sunrise game drive, we were only sleeping for 5 to 6 hours a night, which is just not nearly close what I need. So make sure to book rest into your trip as well. Now, the 4th step of our 4-step planning method is to depart. And this is really like a 2-month process. So you can kind of follow along this video, save it for later. You've got a lot of trip planning to do at this point. Then come back, and at step 4 in this depart section, let's say that this is the 2 months before your trip, you're going to need to make sure that you have all the right gear for your trip. I have an entire Africa packing video for your upcoming safari down below. That's coming out if you're seeing this too early in a couple months. There's some trips or small airplanes that restrict your luggage weight pretty strictly. So I'll help you follow along with that if you only have one small bag that you can bring. But at this time too, this is also when you want to look at all the different type of documentation, travel insurance, vaccines. So let's talk a little bit about that. All these areas that we've been talking about this entire video do not require any type of vaccination for you to travel. There's some medical recommendations that maybe you can get if you are more immune susceptible. I am not a doctor. You can go ask your doctor. Tim and I did not get any vaccinations to travel, nor did Tim's sister of our similar age. Tim's parents, who are in their early 70s, wanted to get a couple more vaccinations before they went, so their doctor recommended some things for the region. But none of these regions are in any risk areas that require or suggest vaccinations. That's kind of more like Africa level 2. But travel insurance and health-related travel insurance is something that I always recommend on every trip. You will have travel insurance, as in trip cancellation, late bag fee reimbursement, on a lot of credit cards that you're booking this trip with. So don't overpay for travel insurance. You know, like if you're booking your flight and it recommends, do you want trip insurance? If you're booking it on like the Chase Sapphire card and Amex card, just double check that you might already have a lot of things covered. Now the health side of things, coming at least from an American, we do not have health care abroad on most all of our health insurances in the US. That is something that we almost always buy for each trip. There's a link below in the video you can go check out. We always book with World Nomads. They start to age out. I think if you're over 65, there might be a better insurance option tailored to your age group because you might not be covered in certain travel insurances, but that's basically a emergency insurance that we like to think of it. We've used it a lot of times all around the world, having to just quickly go to urgent care in New Zealand, some $200 bill that we pay for, submit all of the paperwork, and then are reimbursed after the trip when we're back home. This travel health insurance is usually pretty inexpensive too. For a 2-week trip, it might be under $200. So we always make sure that we're just tackling it onto a trip because it covers things like if you're airlifted out or you're eaten by a lion on this safari vacation of yours. Because we love making travel easier for you and we've got so many awesome resources, we also have a pre-trip checklist that you can download separate from this 4-step planning method, separate from my 3-day packing method. There is an entire last minute things to remember that take so much time in that week before a trip. It helps you map out getting ready for jet lag. It helps you map out thinking about things around the house, like making sure you're taking advantage of your last trash day, cleaning out the fridge, making sure you have childcare, pet care, just all those last minute reminders. It's just a free PDF download below. Are you excited for your trip yet? If you want to keep this inspiration flowing and you haven't yet seen our 2-week African safari adventure on Tim and Finn, that's what you gotta watch next. Throw it up on your biggest 4K screen if you've just been watching me on your phone and your iPad. In watching that, you can get a really good feel of what it is like at a luxury safari private game reserve in South Africa, and then you can see all about us being probably too adventurous for our own good at Devil's Pool in Victoria Falls. Don't forget to download the 4-step PDF down below. Save this video so you can come back as you're planning for your trip in the next month. And if you made it this long, subscribe to this channel. We are Trip Travel Gear. We make these videos because we love making travel easier, and we mostly do that through our travel gear products. We make packing compression cubes for your trip. We make awesome travel pouches and toiletry bags, and we are just a travel gear channel. And my job here is to make these videos to help you plan your own DIY trips because we just love DIY travel ourselves. Have an amazing trip to Africa. And when you come back, let me know how it went in the comments, or tag us on your trip with your tripped products. We love sharing your travel stories on social media. Bon voyage!